An ego that feeds on your loyalty cannot survive your absence. Walking away is not a retreat. It is a tactical starvation of their entire identity. Miranda Priestly's authority in The Devil Wears Prada is a hallucination entirely subsidized by your willingness to play along. There is a chilling clarity that arrives when you realize the person you have been trying to impress is not powerful at all, but entombed inside a hollow empire of their own making. In The Devil Wears Prada, Anne Hathaway's Andy Sachs discovers that every high-status transaction comes with a hidden receipt written in the subordinate's authentic self. Miranda Priestly's coat being whisked away as part of the office's arrival ritual, and Emily literally telling Andy she is chained to that desk, become tiny rituals of dominance that only work because everyone present agrees to become smaller. Then comes the rupture. Andy dropping the phone into the fountain after leaving Miranda in Paris, and in that single gesture, the illusion dies. Miranda Priestly's authority was never self-sustaining. It lived on borrowed awe, fear, obedience, and Andy's continued willingness to play her assigned role in the theater. We make the same bargain in our own lives, trading pieces of ourselves for safe seats at tables that quietly resent our presence. But the moment the deal is refused, the ego that fed on our loyalty is forced to confront its own emptiness. That is why walking away stops being a loss and becomes a form of execution. Today we are opening the logic chamber to deconstruct the 5 brutal reasons why walking away breaks their ego. We are exposing the cold mechanism that turns what they believed was unbreakable control into obvious, pathetic dependence. The moment you withdraw your participation, their hollow empire is forced to face its own emptiness. Emptiness is where this story stops pretending. At the beginning of The Devil Wears Prada, power appears absolute. Miranda Priestly does not simply run Runway magazine, she bends gravity inside it. Her arrival changes the oxygen in the room. Assistants stiffen, editors sharpen, grown adults rehearse their own disappearance just to avoid becoming the object of her gaze. The hierarchy is clear. Miranda speaks, and everyone else translates her mood into labor. Andy enters this machine as an outsider, which is precisely why she is so vulnerable to it. She still has a self, opinions, clumsy shoes, a boyfriend and friends who still speak to her like she is a person instead of a function. That makes her look weak in this ecosystem, but beneath it, that untouched self is the only real threat in the room. Because systems like Miranda's do not merely need competence, they need surrender. What the empire feeds on is not work, it is consent. And once Andy begins adapting, the trap becomes beautiful. Better clothes, faster reflexes, thinner hesitation. Nigel remakes her wardrobe, Miranda starts trusting her with bigger tasks, and Andy becomes more valuable to the machine at the exact moment she becomes less recognizable to herself. That is the dirty secret hidden under every polished hierarchy. The throne only looks permanent while someone is still kneeling. Reason 1. Their power only exists inside the ritual. Miranda does not dominate Runway through force alone. She dominates through ritual. A coat and bag silently handed off the moment she arrives. Emily telling Andy she is chained to that desk. A demand so absurd nobody pauses long enough to call it absurd. Power loves choreography. Emily has trained herself into instant obedience, and Nigel, with all his elegance, helps soften the violence into style. That is what makes the structure so durable. Everybody performs their role so well that the humiliation starts looking like professionalism. Control becomes believable when everyone rehearses it together. And we know this world better than we admit. Sometimes it is a workplace, sometimes a relationship, sometimes a family system built around one person's moods. You learn the timing, the facial expressions, the emotional weather. You start moving before you are even asked. That is when dependence disguises itself as discipline. And the moment you stop responding on cue, when we stop treating every signal like a command, the whole performance begins to look flimsy. The ritual only feels sacred until someone refuses to bow. Reason 2. Walking away restores the self they were feeding on. Andy's makeover is framed like success, but the film keeps whispering a darker truth underneath it. Every polished outfit, every swallowed protest, every sacrificed part of her old life makes her more valuable to the machine and less visible to herself. Miranda is not just using Andy's labor, she is feeding on her conversion. Emily is doing the same thing in another form, obsessively shrinking herself to stay worthy of the Paris fantasy. Even Nate's frustration reveals a softer version of the same instinct. He resists the new Andy because people often prefer the version of us that keeps their world stable. What they reward is not always your growth. Sometimes it is your disappearance. That is why walking away wounds them so deeply. The version of you they depended on begins to vanish. You stop being endlessly adjustable. We stop confusing self-erasure with maturity. Your return to yourself feels like betrayal to people who benefited from your confusion. The laugh changes. The tone changes. The approval cools. Suddenly, they are not responding to your absence alone, but to the collapse of the identity they built around having access to you. The real you is expensive to anyone who profited from the edited version. Reason 3. Your exit breaks the isolation that made them feel absolute. Paris matters because it is not just glamorous, it is isolating. Miranda's world grows strongest when it becomes the loudest world in Andy's head, when Runway starts sounding more real than friendship, more urgent than sleep, more valuable than conscience. Emily is the clearest warning. All loyalty, all hunger, all devotion, and still completely disposable when Miranda takes Andy to Paris instead. Nigel understands the cruelty better than anyone, yet he keeps translating it into wit and beauty just to survive near it. A closed system always mistakes itself for the universe. That is how false empires work. They do not simply command you, they shrink every alternative until leaving feels irrational. And then life returns in little flashes. Another voice, another mirror, another standard of worth. That is what walking away actually restores. You remember there are rooms where you do not have to tense your body to belong. We remember that not every gatekeeper is God. Distance is fatal to manufactured greatness. Once you step outside their atmosphere, their scale changes, their certainty looks needy, their mystique starts depending on lighting. Isolation made them look enormous. Perspective makes them look local. Reason 4. Your refusal exposes that they were never admired, only accommodated. The Nigel betrayal is where the film stops being stylish and becomes surgical. Miranda protects herself by sacrificing the one person who has given the system grace, warmth, loyalty, and emotional intelligence. At the Paris luncheon, she publicly gives the James Holt creative director job to Jacqueline instead of Nigel. In that moment, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. This empire is not built on love or admiration. It is built on management. Emily accommodates Miranda because she fears exclusion. Nigel accommodates her because brilliance near power can still feel safer than brilliance alone. Andy accommodates her until she sees the final cost. Fear can look a lot like reverence from a distance, but it is still fear. And we have all watched this happen in ordinary life, too. A person seems magnetic until you say no. A boss seems visionary until you set a limit. A partner seems devoted until your availability is no longer guaranteed. Then the mask slips, not because you changed them, but because your boundary removed the stage lighting. Accommodation ends where self-respect begins. That is why your refusal bruises the ego so badly. It forces a devastating question into the room. Were they ever truly valued? Or were people just adapting around the blast radius? Some egos do not fear abandonment. They fear accurate perception. Reason 5. Walking away forces them to face the emptiness beneath the empire. Then comes the phone in the fountain. No speech, no revenge monologue, no dramatic explanation, just absence. That is why the moment hits with such force. Andy does not overpower Miranda. She simply stops participating in the structure that gave Miranda her emotional scale. Nate broke up with Andy earlier when he no longer recognized the person she was becoming. Andy walks away from Miranda when she realizes the same truth on a larger level. Staying means becoming unrecognizable to herself. The cleanest ending is often the one that withholds performance. Once participation is withdrawn, the machine has nothing left to metabolize. And that is the part that reaches beyond the film and into us. Sometimes walking away is loud, but more often it is silent. You stop over-explaining. We stop giving people endless chances to misunderstand us on purpose. You stop supplying reaction, clarity, softness, access. Domination needs contact. That is the secret. They need your response to keep the story alive. And when none comes, silence becomes unbearable. Because silence is where the hollow empire finally hears its own echo. Absence is the one mirror control cannot edit. That was the name of the trap from the beginning, the hollow empire. The Devil Wears Prada is not just about fashion, ambition, or an impossible woman at the top of a glossy hierarchy. It is about the emotional economy of borrowed power. Miranda is simply the clearest expression of it. Emily shows what happens when loyalty becomes identity. Nigel shows the elegance of survival inside betrayal. Nate shows that even outside institutions, people can still recoil when the version of you they understood begins to disappear. The film keeps moving the same truth through different people, different exits, different wounds. Ego feeds on access, and access feels like power until it is revoked. That is why walking away is so devastating. Not because it destroys them, because it reveals they were never standing on anything solid to begin with. And in the logic chamber, there is no cruelty more precise than that. You do not attack the hollow empire. You leave it alone with itself.